It was the early 1970s, and the streets of Los Angeles pulsed with rock and roll chaos. Inside a dimly lit warehouse-turned-party, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, roaring guitars, and the unmistakable stench of rebellion. Ozzy Osbourne, still just a wild-haired vocalist with Black Sabbath, had walked into the Lion's Den, a gathering of the notorious Hells Angels. Leather jackets, chrome chains, and tattoos seemed to swallow the room whole. The bikers eyed him like a curious predator, sizing up prey. Ozzy knew he didn't exactly fit in. He was small, wiry, and more known for his wailing vocals and stage antics than for being physically intimidating. But he had something no one else did, a raw, unshakable fearlessness and a mischievous grin that could unsettle anyone. A burly Hells Angels member stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "You think you can hang with us, little man?" he sneered. "Or are you just another rock star pretending to be tough?" Ozzy chuckled, tilting his head. "I've been on stage with the devil himself. Mate, I don't scare easy." His voice was calm, almost eerily casual, but the room fell silent for a moment. Sensing the audacity in his tone, other bikers laughed, some skeptical, some amused. The tension was electric. Whispers traveled around the room. "Who is this guy? Does he know what he's gotten himself into?" One of the angels stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "We don't just hand respect to anyone. You gotta prove yourself." The words hung in the smoke-filled air like a challenge. Ozzy leaned back against the wall, a mischievous smirk creeping across his face. He didn't need to respond immediately. The subtle confidence in his posture, the calm amidst potential chaos, was more powerful than any boast. People in the crowd instinctively began to take notice. Something about this unassuming man radiated a strange combination of danger and unpredictability. Then came the moment that would make everyone remember this night forever. A biker, louder than the rest, stepped forward and barked a question that seemed to set the entire room on edge. "All right, Osbourne, what are you gonna do to show us you belong here?" "Manny, wait, Ozzy's grin widened. The kind of grin that promised madness, charisma, and something no one expected. Everyone leaned in, knowing instinctively that whatever he did next would shock them all. And that when the night took a turn that no one, not even Ozzy, would ever forget. The warehouse had gone completely silent. All eyes were on Ozzy Osbourne, the scrappy rock singer who had just claimed he wasn't afraid of anything. The Hells Angels weren't convinced. Not by a long shot. Leather boots scuffed the concrete floor as the tallest, most intimidating biker in the group stepped forward. "All right, little man," he growled, cracking his knuckles. "If you want to hang with us, you're gonna have to prove it. No excuses." Ozzy tilted his head, letting the challenge wash over him. The air smelled of beer, smoke, and something far more dangerous, the anticipation of violence. He didn't flinch. He never did. The biker grinned, revealing a gold tooth that glinted in the dim light. "We got a little initiation for you. Simple. Show us you've got guts. Do it right, and maybe we'll call you one of us. Fail. And, well, you don't want to fail." Ozzy smirked. "I've faced crazier crowds than this." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Some nervous, some genuinely entertained. But the bikers weren't done testing him yet. One of them pulled out a bottle of whiskey and slammed it on the table. "Drink that whole thing in one shot. No stopping." Ozzy raised an eyebrow. "You do realize I've sung in front of thousands of people without crying once, right?" Still, he grabbed the bottle, unscrewed it, and tossed it back in one gulp. Fire burned down his throat, but he kept a steady expression, making it look effortless. The crowd muttered, impressed and slightly uneasy. "You think that's all it takes?" growled another biker, slamming his hand on the table. "We need to see courage, not just a drinking trick." Ozzy nodded. "All right, what's next?" The angels exchanged glances. A tense silence followed, then a challenge that would make most men freeze. A motorcycle revving contest. Ozzy, who had barely touched a bike in his life, was expected to ride full throttle around the warehouse without crashing. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some pulled out their phones, ready to capture the inevitable disaster. "Go on," the tall biker sneered. "Show us you're not just a singer." Ozzy grinned, hopping onto the bike like he owned it. The engine roared beneath him. He wobbled slightly at first, and then suddenly, with a combination of luck and instinct, he took off like a force of nature. Screeches, cheers, and gasps echoed through the warehouse as Ozzy weaved through barrels, narrowly avoiding disaster. His grin never faltered. By now, the tension had transformed into fascination. Even the toughest Hells Angels couldn't hide their amazement. One whispered to another, "This guy, he's crazy and fearless." Ozzy slowed, jumped off the bike, and raised his hands in a mock bow, earning a mix of laughter and grudging respect. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Where did this guy come from? Is he for real? Engagement break with location. Have you ever seen someone face a crazy test like that and survive? Comment below where you're watching from, LA, London, Manila, or somewhere else in the world. The bikers leaned back, sizing him up. They had seen enough to be curious, but not enough to fully trust him. Ozzy's eyes twinkled with mischief, knowing the next challenge would push him even further, and he was ready. And in that moment, everyone knew, this was no ordinary rocker. This was someone who could either crash and burn, or shock the hell out of everyone in the room. The warehouse had erupted into a mix of cheers and anxious whispers. Ozzy Osbourne had just survived the revving motorcycle challenge barely, yet the Hells Angels weren't finished testing him. If anything, the successful stunt had only made them hungrier for more chaos. A tall, heavily tattooed biker slammed his hand against the wall. "Not bad, rock boy," he growled. "But surviving a bike stunt doesn't make you one of us. You gotta prove your guts in something bigger, something dangerous." Ozzy leaned casually against a pillar, arms crossed. "Bigger? Dangerous. You're really trying to scare me, aren't you?" The biker bared his gold-toothed grin. "Scare you? We're just testing your balls, man. You got the guts to stick around, or are you gonna run like the rest?" Around the room, spectators, friends of the Angels, random partygoers, and a few curious locals held their breath. Some filmed the interaction with their phones, capturing every tense moment. The energy in the room was electric, like waiting for a storm to hit. Then the challenge was announced. A small makeshift ramp had been set up in the middle of the warehouse, leading to a row of stacked crates. "You gotta jump that ramp," the biker said. "Land on those crates, and then climb to the top. Don't fail." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The crates wobbled dangerously, stacked like a tower of chaos. Ozzy's eyes narrowed, scanning the setup. He didn't hesitate. He had faced worse crowds and crazier stages, but this wasn't a concert. This was real life, and failure could mean serious injury. He jogged toward the ramp, the roar of the motorcycle engine from before still echoing in the background. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping, but his face remained calm, almost eerily so. Everyone leaned forward, unable to look away. Ozzy launched himself up the ramp. The crate tower shook violently beneath him. A hush fell over the room. For a moment, it looked like he might fall, but with a combination of luck, instinct, and sheer determination, he landed squarely on the top crate. The crowd exhaled as one, a mixture of relief, shock, and awe washing over them. He didn't pause. With a grin he clambered to the top, throwing his arms up in a mock bow. The warehouse erupted. Some bikers who had doubted him now shouted and clapped, a few even laughing nervously. Others, still skeptical, watched silently, unsure what to make of this small, wiry man who had just done the impossible. One of the older Angels, clearly impressed despite himself, muttered to a friend, "I've seen a lot of people try to earn respect, but this guy, he's something else." Ozzy jumped down from the crates, landing with effortless grace. He wasn't just surviving, he was commanding attention. His fearless demeanor, combined with his audacity and charisma, had begun to shift the atmosphere. What started as a tense, hostile test was transforming into something else. Intrigue. Yet, even as some bikers clapped and laughed, a few still eyed him warily. "He's too calm," one whispered. "That's the scary part." Meanwhile, Ozzy's grin widened. He thrived on this tension, feeding off the energy in the room. Every nervous glance, every uncertain whisper, only fueled his confidence. The Hells Angels may have thought they were testing him, but he was already beginning to test them. Engagement moment. Have you ever seen someone face a challenge that seems impossible and actually nail it? Comment below where you're watching from. Los Angeles, London, Manila, or somewhere else in the world. The night was far from over. The Hells Angels still weren't fully convinced of Ozzy's worth, and he knew the next challenge would be the riskiest yet, but he wasn't afraid. In fact, he was starting to enjoy it, because in the eyes of the wildest, toughest gang in the city, Ozzy Osbourne was no longer just a rock singer. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with, reckless, fearless, and utterly unforgettable. And everyone in that warehouse knew one thing for certain. The night was only getting crazier. The room was thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. Music blasted from a dusty jukebox in the corner, a chaotic mix of early heavy metal riffs. The Hells Angels circled the edges of the room like predators, sizing up every person daring enough to step into their territory. They weren't used to outsiders, and certainly not someone like Ozzy Osbourne, a wiry man with wild hair, dark circles under his eyes, and a grin that seemed completely untethered from reason. At first, most of the gang had ignored him, assuming he was just another naive rock kid with a taste for trouble. But Ozzy had already survived the initial challenge, a ridiculous and dangerous stunt that would have scared off any average person. Somehow, his unflinching stare, fearless smirk, and unapologetic attitude had left the Angels whispering among themselves. "Oi," one of the older members muttered, leaning on a battered Harley helmet. "Who is this lunatic?" "He's that singer bloke," another replied. "You know, the one from that band, Sabbath." The murmurs grew louder. Names were tossed around, laughter punctuating disbelief. Here was a man who wasn't backing down, who wasn't trying to impress, but somehow was impressing. Some of the younger Angels began nudging each other, pointing subtly. "Look at him," one whispered. "Does he even realize the danger he's in?" Ozzy, oblivious to the whispers, wandered toward the center of the room. He glanced at the bikers, his eyes glinting with mischief. He took a long swig from a bottle he had been hiding in his coat and flashed a grin that was equal parts crazy and charming. The room went quiet. Nobody had ever seen someone so fearless, so unapologetically themselves, in their midst. And yet, there was something magnetic about him, a spark that demanded attention without demanding respect. One of the Hell's Angels stepped forward, a burly man with a scar slicing across his cheek. "Oi, mate," he said, voice rough. "You've survived what most wouldn't even try. Who the hell are you?" Ozzy raised his eyebrows and leaned closer, voice low but firm. "I'm Ozzy, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I do know I'm here." The gang exchanged glances. His calm honesty, almost absurd honesty, was disarming. In a room full of people constantly putting on bravado, Ozzy's genuine unpredictability was dangerous in a way they respected. "Typical rock star," one of them muttered under his breath, thinking he's untouchable. But the next moment, Ozzy did something that would cement their opinion entirely. He casually grabbed an empty beer bottle and balanced it on his head, then spun it around with his nose while walking between two motorcycles parked side by side. A small cheer erupted from the back of the room. A few bikers laughed, shaking their heads. "Bloody hell," one muttered. "The guy's mental. But I can't take my eyes off him." A hush fell as Ozzy dropped the bottle without breaking stride. He turned to face the Angels, shrugging and grinning like it was all a natural, effortless act. "You think I'm reckless?" he asked. "Maybe I am, but I'm alive, aren't I?" The scarred leader nodded slowly. The respect in his eyes was unmistakable. For the first time, the Hell's Angels weren't seeing an outsider. They were seeing someone who had faced fear, chaos, and danger without flinching, and who did it all with a wild, magnetic charm that made them reconsider their assumptions. Whispers circulated rapidly now. "He's a legend in the making. This bloke, he's something else. Dan T. Think anyone else ever walked in here and done what he just did?" Ozzy didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The recognition and respect had been earned simply by being true to himself, fearless, unpredictable, and unapologetically bold. By the end of the night, the Hell's Angels were no longer skeptics. They were intrigued. Some even began to treat Ozzy less like a guest and more like one of their own. Cautiously, perhaps, but with an unmistakable spark of approval. And Ozzy, he wandered back to the corner of the room, taking in the smoky chaos with a small, satisfied smile. For the first time, he felt the intoxicating thrill of being recognized not just for what he did on stage, but for who he was: wild, untamed, and impossible to ignore. The night was far from over, but something had shifted. Ozzy Osbourne had begun to earn the respect of one of the most feared and unpredictable groups on the planet, simply by being himself. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. The room was thick with smoke, the smell of beer and leather hanging in the air. The Hell's Angels had been sizing him up all evening, whispering to each other, laughing at his eccentric outfits and wild hair. But Ozzy Osbourne didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned back in his chair, a crooked grin on his face, like he knew something the gang didn't. Earlier, the gang had tried to intimidate him with their classic tests, throwing darts at beer bottles, challenging him to reckless stunts on motorcycles, and even seeing if he could handle their rowdy, almost ritualistic initiation games. Each time, Ozzy had stumbled only slightly, then laughed, shrugged, and somehow turned it into something hilarious and daring. That combination, fearless and unpredictable, was slowly turning the tide. One of the gang leaders, a burly man with tattoos running from neck to knuckles, finally leaned in. "All right, Ozzy, you've got guts, but are you leader material? Let's see how you handle this." He gestured toward a rickety motorcycle sitting in the middle of the dimly lit garage. "You're going to ride that bike through the warehouse, and don't wreck it." The other Hell's Angels chuckled darkly. Everyone knew the warehouse floor was cluttered with crates, broken glass, and a few loose chains dangling from the ceiling. No one had dared try it before. Most people would have laughed nervously and stepped back. Not Ozzy. He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked around. The room was silent, the kind of silence that comes just before chaos. "All right," he said, his voice calm, but charged with mischief. "Let's see if this thing wants to ride." The gang smirked, expecting disaster. But Ozzy had a plan, or at least, he had that legendary instinct for survival mixed with pure audacity. He hopped onto the bike, kicked it to life, and slowly edged forward. Every eye followed him, every muscle tense, waiting for the inevitable crash. Ozzy's foot caught a loose chain. The bike wobbled dangerously. A collective gasp rose from the gang. But instead of panicking, Ozzy leaned with it, letting the bike sway, and then laughed. A sharp, high-pitched laugh that cut through the tension. He zigzagged through the crates like a man possessed, narrowly missing a stack of empty barrels. The Hell's Angels' laughter shifted from mockery to amazement. Then came the craziest part. Near the back of the warehouse, a chain was swinging from the ceiling, perfectly positioned to knock the rider off balance. Most would have braked or avoided it. Ozzy, he reached up and grabbed it mid-ride, spinning around with it like he owned the space. The warehouse erupted in shouts and applause. One of the older Angels, the one who had doubted him the most, stepped forward, slapping Ozzy on the back so hard it nearly knocked him off the bike. "I don't know what the hell you are, man, but you've got balls the size of this warehouse." Ozzy laughed again, hopping off the bike with a flourish, tossing his hands into the air. "Guess I'm your man then?" At that moment, the dynamic shifted. No one laughed at him anymore. No one doubted him. The respect was instantaneous, palpable. Ozzy wasn't just the weird rock singer anymore. He was a force to be reckoned with, someone who could command attention, defy expectations, and entertain chaos all at once. The angels cheered. Some even lifted him onto their shoulders, chanting his name. In one night, Ozzy Osbourne had transformed from the eccentric outsider into a respected, almost legendary figure among the Hells Angels. And the craziest thing? He hadn't sought this leadership. He hadn't tried to prove anything. He had simply been himself, fearless, unpredictable, and audaciously daring. That night, the warehouse became a story that would be told for years. Every new member who entered the gang would hear about the time Ozzy Osbourne rode the dangerous bike through the chaos and earned their respect. The legend of Ozzy wasn't just about music anymore. It was about courage, audacity, and doing the impossible in front of people who didn't believe you could. By the end of the night, Ozzy leaned against a wall, grinning as the gang clapped him on the back and laughed at his antics. He didn't gloat, he didn't boast. But one thing was clear, the Hells Angels now saw him not just as a rock star, but as a man who could stand fearless in the eye of danger and win. The tension in the room had reached a fever pitch. Ozzy had already faced the stares, the silent judgments, and the barely concealed skepticism of the Hells Angels. But no one, not a single soul in that crowded garage, expected what he was about to do next. The Angels had thrown him a challenge, a dangerous stunt that most seasoned bikers wouldn't attempt lightly. Ozzy had been asked to ride one of their heaviest motorcycles through a narrow corridor lined with crates, barrels, and a suspiciously slippery floor. Any misstep could mean a serious injury. A joke, a test of courage, perhaps both. The room fell silent as Ozzy walked toward the bike, his iconic black leather jacket hanging loosely, his long hair bouncing with every confident step. He didn't look nervous. He didn't fumble. Instead, there was a wild glint in his eyes, a mixture of mischief, fearlessness, and complete disregard for conventional sense. "Watch closely, boys," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. As he swung his leg over the motorcycle, the Hells Angels exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to chaos, to wild antics, but this was Ozzy Osbourne, a man with a reputation for music, drugs, and reckless energy. But now stepping into a world where survival demanded respect earned the hard way. He revved the engine once. The roar echoed off the walls like a beast, waking from slumber. The crowd stepped back instinctively, some gripping each other's arms. Ozzy's gaze scanned the corridor. Then, with the slightest smirk, he tore down the narrow path, tires screeching against the slick floor. It was chaos. Barrels wobbled dangerously, crates teetered on the edge, and sparks flew as metal scraped concrete. Every bystander held their breath. One wrong move, and Ozzy could have been flattened, but he didn't falter. Halfway through, a section of the floor seemed almost impossible. A spill of oil glinted under the harsh lights, threatening to send him skidding across the room. The angels whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, some holding back laughs, unsure if he would crash spectacularly. But Ozzy leaned into the curve, knees gripping the bike, eyes fixed ahead. He leaned back, twisted the throttle, and with a burst of daring genius, launched the bike over a small ramp someone had left in the corner. Time seemed to slow, hearts raced. And then he landed perfectly, tires hitting the floor without a wobble, and the bike roared forward like it had never known danger. A stunned silence filled the room. Then, like a dam breaking, the Hells Angels erupted. Cheers, whistles, and claps shook the walls. The toughest, most battle-hardened bikers were hooting in disbelief. Ozzy had not only completed the stunt, he had owned it. One of the senior leaders stepped forward, clapping Ozzy on the shoulder with a grin. "I'll be damned. You're one of us now." Ozzy laughed, breathless, adrenaline pumping. "I told you, boys. It's all about the thrill." The crowd surrounded him, lifting him onto their shoulders in a chaotic celebration. Phones, cameras, and cigarettes all went airborne in the frenzy. But amid the chaos, Ozzy remained himself, wild, fearless, untamed, and magnetic. That one act, a crazy, death-defying, completely reckless ride, cemented his status, not just as a rock legend, but as a man who could command respect in any world, even among the notorious Hells Angels. And from that moment on, stories about Ozzy's audacity spread like wildfire, whispers in the streets, legends told in bars, and eventually, viral tales that would inspire millions. He didn't just survive the test, he owned it. And the world, in that moment, realized Ozzy Osbourne was fearless, and totally, gloriously crazy. The night Ozzy Osbourne had shocked the Hells Angels became the stuff of legend. Stories whispered in back alleys, told around campfires, and later, immortalized in rock history books. Word of what he had done spread like wildfire. Every person who witnessed it that night seemed to tell the story differently. Some added some stuck to the raw truth, but one thing was undeniable. Ozzy had earned respect in a world where respect was not given lightly. By morning, the story had already leaked beyond the party. In a city where rumors travel faster than motorcycles roar, tales of Ozzy's audacity were buzzing through Los Angeles. He wasn't just the Madman of Black Sabbath anymore. He was a man who had stared danger squarely in the face and laughed. Fans of the band couldn't believe it. Their frontman, notorious for chaotic stage antics and wild behavior, had just proved that his wildness was more than performance. It was courage. Even journalists caught wind of the story. Rock magazines ran headlines that made readers double take. Ozzy Osbourne, the night he became a Hells Angels legend. Photos of him backstage, with hair tangled and clothes torn from the night's chaos, began circulating in print and on the first traces of fan forums online. Unbelievable, some wrote. He's fearless. He doesn't even flinch. Others simply typed, "That's Ozzy. That's why we love him." The story went viral in a pre-social media way, passed hand to hand, from concert goer to reporter, and from street corners to record stores. For Ozzy, though, it wasn't about fame. He wasn't standing there waving his arms, demanding recognition. Instead, he quietly carried himself with a new weight, the weight of respect earned the hard way. In a world of roaring engines, harsh glares, and leather jackets, Ozzy had proven he could survive and even lead in chaos. People whispered about how he had taken control, how he had diffused tension with a mix of humor and audacity, and how he had managed to turn what could have been a disaster into a moment of sheer legend. Among the Hells Angels, the night had a similar effect. Members who had doubted him now spoke of him with grudging admiration. Their skepticism was replaced by a kind of grudging respect that only true audacity can earn. They laughed and recounted his actions with exaggeration, but every retelling carried a kernel of truth. Ozzy had shown them that madness could coexist with courage, that unpredictability could command respect, and that leadership sometimes comes from the most unlikely places. As the weeks passed, fans who hadn't been at that fateful night only learned about it through stories, interviews, and fan letters. Concerts took on a new intensity, with crowds who now saw Ozzy not only as a rock star but as a man who had stared down real life, danger, and emerged unscathed, even triumphant. He became more than just a performer. He became a symbol of audacity, fearlessness, and the idea that sometimes the wildest individuals are the ones capable of earning the deepest respect. And so, the legend of that night lived on. Rock fans shared it with younger generations. Musicians told it as caution and inspiration, and Ozzy, he continued to smile that crooked grin, knowing that he had lived the madness he preached. He had earned a title few ever receive, not from a chart, not from an award, but from a world that respected courage in its rawest, wildest form. Final call to action, YouTube friendly. If you'd have the guts to do what Ozzy did, type crazy in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more insane stories of rock legends who lived on the edge.